All right. We will be recording tonight. We've been recording all of our Groundswell events this fall. It's kind of the new normal for us, so hope you don't mind. If you do, just go ahead and turn off your screen, and you can always change your name, but we promise to take good care of it. So welcome. We made it here. It's amazing. We are here finally, closing the end of this crazy year, and we are so glad to have all of you joining us tonight to celebrate all of our accomplishments together and to celebrate some of the fabulous people in our community and the work we've been doing together over the year. So Groundswell, as you know, is a coalition. We're a group of community partners in schools working to do hands-on environmental education in West Michigan. We just celebrated our 10th anniversary last year. We are one of the Great Lakes Stewardship Initiative hubs, and we are supported through Grand Valley's College of Education, as well as the Great Lakes Stewardship Initiative, the MySTEM Network, WEGI Foundation, NOAA, Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, and more. A lot of hard work and elbow grease. Representing the Groundswell team who is all here today, we are represented by Groundswell and also the Center for Educational Partnerships within Grand Valley. So myself, Jessica Vander Ark. We also have Mara Spears with us here tonight, helping monitor the chat. We have Vida Hodges here as well. Joanna Allerhand, May Ma, Clay Pellin, and our director, David Bear is also here with us tonight. So thanks to all of you for being here. And we wanted to, as a group, thank all of you who are involved in the Groundswell Network. All right. Just a few housekeeping notes. Feel free to drop questions in the chat throughout the event. We will try to keep on top of it. If by the end of the event, we should hopefully go through all the questions. Later tonight, when we hear Crystal speaking, we will not be asking her questions directly. We will be collecting questions throughout the presentation and then having a nice Q&A session at the end. So that will be the plan. I will go ahead and thank the rest of our important community here. We have, first of all, the Brewery Vivant and Broadleaf Local Beer for being a part of our event tonight. And we sincerely hope everybody enjoyed the food. If you were able to get it, we'd love to hear back on how that went for everyone. It's our first time doing it quite that way. And we wanted to thank all of our community partners, the people in our hubs, the consultants. I'm not sure if Rebecca's here yet. The Advisory Council, the Strategic Action Council, all of our committee members, and all of you educators that work so hard with us all the time. So we want to thank them. On the screen, I wanted to recognize the Advisory Council, the Strategic Action Council. So big thanks to these guys, Rhiannon Mulligan, Michelle Story, Erin Corin, Janet Vale, Wendy Vogel, and Eileen Buchenstein. They work so hard throughout the year trying to support Groundswell programs and bouncing ideas around with us and giving us guidance. And we thank you so much for all the time and effort you put into the Groundswell community. Next, I'd like to introduce the Director of the Center for Educational Partnerships, David Bear.
Thank you, Jessica. I just wanted to say, as we have every year, I thoroughly enjoy getting together and meeting with you all. It's so different not seeing you in person. The side conversations running around the room is always half the fun of this, but we will be back next year with the face-to-face activities once we get past all of this. But thank you all so much for coming this evening. I just want to say a couple words of welcome to folks here. You'll be hearing from our dean shortly, Dean Soman. But I also want to just let you know we have some other supporters and folks who worked with us over the years from Grand Valley State University. Paul Stansby is here. He's the acting dean of the College of Community and Public Service. Obviously, he's a colleague of ours at GVSU. We work closely with many of his faculty, and just because of their mission and what they do, they're a strong supporter of community engagement. And we welcome him and glad that he could join us this evening. Amy Schelling is the Associate Dean at the College of Education and also the Director of Teacher Education. You may have known her in that role. Some of you I know have our students in the field. And I welcome her for coming and seeing a little bit of what we do in action here tonight as well. And last person who has been here, I think, every year that I've invited him has been John Chinsky, who's currently the Associate Dean of the College of Education. I want to say a special word for John because he is retiring at the end of this semester. If you've worked with the College of Ed much at all, you must know him in many capacities. He was the chair of the Leadership Education unit for a long time. I'm sorry, Educational Leadership Unit. He even worked for, before that, he worked in Lansing Public Schools for 20 years as administrator. So he's very familiar with educational settings and has been a great supporter of our program for many, many years. When he was acting dean for a while, he would come to everything and would come to our events and really had a strong support for the community. And of course, his current role as Associate Dean of Community Engagement has him constantly working with folks. I believe you're here, John. So I just want to say personally, also from our entire office, we appreciate the support you've given personally, some financially, but mostly so you're just here and you seem to care about what we're doing. And you've been a real friend to us, and we will miss you at this as well as many other events that we run in our office. So I just want to be sure to say thank you and let everyone know that you are still around. You're just going to be retiring and maybe doing some other things with your time. So thank you so much for all the years of service that you've given to us and obviously to the university. So that's all I had, Jessica, if you want to proceed with things. So thank you.
Sure. Next, I have the honor of introducing the Dean of the College of Education, Cheryl Soman. Dr. Cheryl Soman.
Good evening, everyone. So good to be here. As David and Jessica have said, the virtual format, right? We're probably 9 months into it now and are getting a little bit more understanding of what we're doing here. And this is one of the events that I've had the opportunity to attend since I've been dean in the college and that I really enjoy. I'm really sorry that I'm not going to be there or we're not together in person. Hopefully by next year, this time we'll be able to be together again. So I'm just here to convey a welcome to you from the college and to say thank you for your ongoing participation in Groundswell and your support for our student environmental stewardship. I know that this is a tough year to be engaged in place-based education, but it's certainly a testament to how important this is to you, that you are still engaged and everyone has really adjusted to this new instructional mode to make things even more engaging for our students, because certainly it must be a challenge for them as well, but to have something that's place-based that allows them to engage in things that are related to the environment is very important. And so I want to say thank you to all of our partners, to the teachers that are working with our students. I understand from David that we have 15 schools working with 50 teachers and over 2,500 students this semester. And that's about half of what we typically have, I understand. But so that's very significant in a year when we're all virtual. So I want to say thanks, and I'm glad to see that so many of you are still interested in ensuring that place-based education has room in your curriculum. Also to the center staff who've been working so hard to make everything as normal as possible and to keep those connections with our partners in the community and with our schools. Thank you so much for the work that you've done this semester to keep this going, supporting those teachers and those students remotely. It's very important at this time. I'm looking forward to the program and to hearing more about what's going on. That's always one of the very exciting things about this, is to actually hear from the teachers and to hear from our speaker this evening. And David's introduced some of the folks in our college who, when we get back together, except for John, of course, it's bittersweet. You know, John's going to be moving into the next phase of his career. I think can't see John sitting still for too long, but certainly he's not going to primarily be with us. So thank you, and thanks David and Jessica and the Groundswell and SEP for allowing me to participate and to be here to give this brief welcome to everyone.
Thank you, Cheryl. We appreciate your being here every year and the support you show us by being here. All right, next in the program, Groundswell has a new award that we would like to have Joanna Allerhand announce, please. Joanna?
All right, I'm gonna give a try of having my video up, but if my internet decides to be finicky, like it's decided to do this evening, we'll cut that so I can at least have my voice. So I get the distinct honor of sharing what we're calling our Groundswell Swell Teacher Award. It's something that we hope to be able to do every year. And we're lucky to have such a wonderful pool of teachers to pull from for this. This year's award goes to Bill Moll, a teacher at Godwin Heights Middle. Bill has been a part of Groundswell since about 2016, and his first project was very ambitious. He wanted to remove an area of blacktop on his school's campus and replace it with native plants. This would reduce the amount of stormwater runoff and provide more green space for his students, which was sorely needed. Providing connections to nature and creating these types of engaging, hands-on experiences for his students is at the heart of what Bill does. He teaches them about nature in an area dominated by pavement and empowers them with the skills and confidence to fix the problems they see. The project Removing Blacktop involved researching how plants can remove pollutants from soil. When they test water quality in a local park, they think about improvements they could make to the stream in the future. And when there's a pandemic, he teaches them resilience and maintains his commitment to getting students outside. So thank you, Bill, for not only teaching your students about the environment, but truly making a difference in their lives so they can go on and make a difference in the community.
Now, I'd love to see Bill unwrap his gift if he's there.
Right here. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I appreciate everything Groundswell has enabled me to do for this stuff. And so thank you so much and thanks for everybody from Eileen and Rebecca and Deanna who's helped for all of my projects throughout the year for my students. So, all right. The Swell Teacher Award and all right. Well, thank you very much. I greatly appreciate it. That's very, very cool. All right. Thank you.
Congrats, Bill.
Thank you so much. All right.
I'm not there to knock over anything at this year at the celebration, nor Jessica, so. It's not
It was
okay.
him. It was you.
Yeah.
We wanted to also thank for this beautiful plaque. Amy at Engrave Detail was amazing and took our idea of the dragonfly and made it amazing. So thanks to her as well. All right, y'all. We are at that time in the night where I have the distinct honor of introducing actually not only our guest speaker for tonight, but one of my new favorite people. Crystal Scott-Tunstall is an affiliate professor in the Environmental and Sustainability Studies program at Grand Valley State University. She has a Bachelor of Science in Plant and Soil Science and a Master of Science in Urban Forestry and Interpretation from Southern Illinois University. Her thesis was titled "The Social and Empowering Effect of Community Gardens on a Chicago Urban Area in North Lawndale. Reported results of a quantitative study done on people of color in an urban area and how they view their local food system." In Chicago, Crystal has a community garden named in her honor. Crystal is also a member of the Grand Rapids Urban Agricultural Committee, the NAACP Environmental Justice Committee, the Kent County Food and Nutrition Coalition, New City Neighbors Urban Farm Board of Directors, and Access of West Michigan Board of Directors. Outside of work, Crystal enjoys spending time with her husband, Dwayne, also a Grand Valley professor, and her son, Christopher, who I heard is enjoying his new Groundswell t-shirt today. So I wanted to say thank you, Crystal, for joining us. It is an honor to have you. I heard a little bit of your story as we've talked over the last few weeks planning for this event, and I cannot wait to hear the pieces that I have not heard yet. So welcome from Groundswell and the Groundswell community, and take it away.
All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Groundswell, for having me. I would like to start off with saying that I sit at a table, I feast at a table that is prepared before me. So I stand on the shoulders of my ancestors and those who have come before me in the work of sustainability, okay? As a teacher, I love show and tell. So I do have a artifact as I was thinking about my history and my family's history and how it touched local Chicago history, where I'm from, as well as national history. So here is my show and tell piece. Hold up my notebook so you can see it. This is one of a set of glasses that I inherited from my grandmother, and that is JFK. And the back has his famous quote, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." So you will get to hear a little bit about how my grandmother acquired this set of glasses and what it meant on her journey. So I'm going to share my screen, and while I share my screen, I've also had some issues this week, technical wise. So I'm going to stop my camera while I share my presentation. All right, so tonight I'm going to talk to you about growing gardens in urban communities. And first, I'm going to talk a little bit, of course, about myself and my story. So I was born and raised in Chicago in the North Lawndale community. North Lawndale is located in the East Garfield part or neighborhood of Chicago. So this picture here is actually the house where I grew up, and I still have family that live there today. So this house was actually purchased by my grandfather in 1958, and this was his second house. Now, my grandfather and my grandmother migrated during the Great Migration of African American people from the South to the North, and they all came up north for better lives. So my grandfather worked as a Pullman porter, and his first house was on the north side of Chicago. Now, in the history of Chicago, there has been two mayors by the name of Daley. There has been Mayor Daley the father and Mayor Daley the son. Mayor Daley the father, who was mayor during the 1950s, he famously had a trip to Chicago. I mean, not to Chicago, to New York, I'm sorry. And he saw the buildings, the high rises, and people living in them in what we know now as the projects. And so he brought this idea back to Chicago, and he sought out a space. And it just so happens that my grandfather's first house was on that land. And so in this new construction, many people lost their houses, my grandfather being one of them. He fought hard, but he lost his battle. He had to sell his house through a law known as eminent domain. And that fight for his house struck something in him. And I remember him telling me the story of how the mayor came to him and said, I appreciate you fighting for your house. Would you like an apartment in the high rises that are being built? And my grandfather, not having an education, knew that being a homeowner was more valuable to his family than renting an apartment. And so he said, no, thank you. Those buildings went on to be infamously known as the Cabrini Green projects. So I often thank my grandfather for dodging that bullet and being smart, although he was not formally educated. Now, in this house, I was the third generation to serve in community engagement. And in this time, before my time, when my mother was younger, while living in this house, something happened during the 60s. First of all, JFK was assassinated in 63, as we all know. But in 65, the Chicago Freedom Movement was developed to address systematic racial segregation and discrimination in Chicago and its suburbs. That effort was led by Martin Luther King. And so in 66, Martin Luther King famously came to Chicago, to the West Side, where I grew up. And he led a march. He rented an apartment on 16th and Pulaski, and he is videotaped, famously saying that Chicago was the most prejudiced place he had ever lived. Now, in that march, my grandmother, my grandfather, and my mother joined him on the west side of Chicago. And so by this time, my grandmother and grandfather had become a little more politically aware of their power in politics and what it meant to stand up for themselves, especially once my grandfather had lost his house. At that time, around that time, is where when my grandmother acquired the set of glasses that has been passed on to me. So again, in our communities in Chicago, each street has what's known as a block club. So your block club is just a group of neighbors who go about doing the business for the betterment of your street. Several block clubs can work together if they're in the same area. That's common. Some of them work together also with organizations. So in my home, like I said, my grandmother was in the South, came up north. Now, while she was growing up in the South, she lived on a farm with her family and she sharecropped. So when she got to Chicago and they moved to this house, she really wanted to continue to garden and do the things that she used to do in the South. So I grew up in this house with my grandmother having a teeny strip of a garden because we didn't have a lot of growing space in our backyard. But every summer she would garden. And when whatever she didn't grow, every summer, my mother would go to the farmer's market and purchase big, large volumes of vegetables. And so we knew as children, when my mom would turn the corner in her car and she was coming back from the market, you had to stop playing and go inside and help. We would pick greens, we would shuck corn, we would snap beans, and in fall we would can. We had a lot of experience around food. My grandmother taught us recipes and how to cook, and that was our way of life in my home. Now, as a child, I specifically remember a conversation I had with a playmate down the street. And she was talking about her and her mom going to the local grocery store. Now, my neighborhood technically had become a food desert, especially after the 1968 King riots. So the local grocery store for us was a little over a mile away, and it was called Supergiant. And this place was horrible. All year long, it stunk inside. The floors were always dirty. They mopped with dirty mop water. There were 3 vegetable stands, and all of the produce would be rotten on the bottom. And it was just a bad experience. Just a few freezers, just a few shelving for pantry items, and a couple of fridges. In my home, we were not allowed to shop here. My mother would drive outside of the community to grocery shop. But I realized in my conversation with my playmate that that was her experience was with food was at that supergiant. She didn't think about how food was grown, if it came from a farm, anything like that. So that conversation stayed with me throughout my life. Now, later, once I got to high school, end up going to a high school outside of my community. I went to Von Steuben Math and Science Center on the north side of Chicago. It took me 2 hours on one bus to get there and 2 hours back home. So half of the time I left in the dark, I came home in the dark. My senior year of high school, my school offered a horticulture class. I had a horticulture teacher who would offer additional things to do after school. So he would teach us like florist tech skills after school. And he saw that I had a lot of skill with growing and plants and being a florist, things like that. And so he talked to me one day and he said, you know, where do you live? And I said, I live on the west side. And he said, are you familiar with Garfield Park Conservatory? This is a picture of Garfield Park Conservatory. And he said, I'm a member of the Alliance and they have a docent program and I would love to put you in that program. And so I said, okay, but you probably would have to talk to my mom. And so he said, no problem. And so one day he drove me home from school and he sat at my dining room table and my mom was old school. He talked to her and he told her about what he saw in me. He wants to put me in this program. And she said, sure, no problem. So he put me in the docent program. I went there every day after school. My job was to learn every single plant in the conservatory because the docents would give tours. And so if you're not familiar with conservatories, a conservatory is like a museum for plants. There's all different kinds of rooms and environments and temperatures and plant life. And so I went on to do that program until the summer after my senior year. I learned how to give tours there. And one of my favorite rooms there is the fern room, which is in this picture. And if you look here on each side of the picture, framing this picture is 2 cycads. And these cycads are as old as they date back prehistoric. So nobody really knows exactly how old they were. But this was my favorite room because it had plant life, it had animal life because we had koi fish in the pond, and there were just over 100 plants in this one room. So this was always my favorite to end my tour with. So after high school, I went on to college for horticulture and also to grad school for forestry. Before I went to high school, I saw an opportunity. My block club was asked to go and be a part of a program through Green Corps Chicago. And this program would allow you to take a vacant lot and turn it into a community garden. And so being the only kid at these meetings, I thought, this is our chance. This is my community's chance. And I thought about that conversation I had with my peer. And I thought this is my chance to give other children in my community a chance to see their food and be involved with the things that they ate. And so I went for it. I went to every meeting. I ended up telling my horticulture teacher about it. And so he said, you know, if you guys need help, maybe we can plan a trip around it. So my senior year, I got to plan this trip where the 2 horticulture classes came to my community, and they got to see my street where I lived, and they helped us install the garden. And my neighbors provided food for them. I took them on tours at the conservatory, and I was so proud of that moment because my school was very diverse. And a lot of the students were from the North Side. And all they knew of the West Side was the horrible stories on the news. So I was so proud that I got to show them that real people live here and real people do care about this place. And the things that you hear on the news are not the only things going on in my community. So here is where I kind of started thinking about my career when I got into high school or my senior year and beyond, what was going to happen with my career or my schooling in college. And so here is a picture of the garden that I got to draw out, and my neighbors named it Crystal's Peace Garden after me. So here are some shots within the garden. And this is about middle of the garden facing out to the street. So I thought, as I went on to college, how am I going to continue to be connected to the community? What am I going to do? What connections can I continue to have? So every summer I would come back, and every summer, the 2 houses that you can see right in the middle, these 2 older ladies lived in my community, and one of them became the garden keeper. And she always felt like she had a hand in my life. She would ask me to do things. She would spend time with me. And a lot of times she wouldn't even ask my mom. It was like having another mom. And so one of the things that she did was she made opportunities for me to come home and internship with different organizations that would get involved with the garden. Another thing that she gave me, which was priceless, and this started actually before I left for college, she gave me the opportunity to learn how to write grants. Now, her way of teaching me or giving me the opportunity to learn was very non-formal, I would say. She basically gave me the paperwork and said, follow the instructions and figure it out. You're a smart girl, you can make this happen. I said, okay. And so I did it. And I was sitting on my front porch, writing grants and actually being awarded those grants. And they were small grants from the city, but it was a great opportunity to learn a skill that I try to take time and share with my students from time to time now. So in my start, I started as this community engagement person. And soon I found myself becoming a community connector. And in my role as a community connector, I was often used by organizations to connect to my community. So maybe if an organization didn't know how to get in touch with another Black club, they would send me out to talk to them. Or if the community wasn't sure about the intent of an organization, they would ask me to go to the meeting. So again, I was barely an adult when asked to do these things. So a lot of hands-on training came my way early in my life. So all of those things bring me here today to you. And I know that some of you are interested in how you can get started in implementing gardening into your classrooms, into your science experience for your students. So let's talk a bit about getting started. First, I would ask you, what are your experiences with gardening and growing? Do you have a garden at home? Do you like to cook? I would definitely tell people to start where their passion lies, because your students are going to pick up on that passion. And it will be easier, if you're excited about it, to get them excited about it. I would also ask, what educational experiences would you like your students to have? So I would say sit down, think about the activities you want to do, think about what the overall experience you want them to have, what takeaways you want them to have, and plan that out. So I will show you an example of that. Also, what educational, as I said, what educational outcomes would you like for your students to have? And then also, how can you get other people involved? Who are the people around you? Who are your helpers? So an example of getting started is just sitting down and maybe writing out a curriculum, an activity curriculum. So one of the things that I do and have done for organizations in the local Grand Rapids area is write activity curriculum. So this example here is a curriculum activity, just a compilation of activities that I wrote for New City Neighbors Urban Farm. It is for this past summer. As you know, COVID happened and the shutdown happened. And so we had to turn and make a virtual gardening curriculum for our gardening club that we do every summer there. So our theme this year was reduce, reuse, and recycle. So this is an example of a activity that we do. So this one particularly is making mint ice cubes. The activities that were chosen was definitely thought out, like how can it translate virtually for the student? And so what we end up doing, it was making little packets that they would get every week with their materials in it. And so we have here in the curriculum a list of materials. We always have a finished item picture, instructions, of course. Also, you could list why that particular activity is important. And then also, I always list the STEM or STEAM learning component that's involved in each activity. So that's something you can do when considering what activities you want your students to do and what you want their overall experience to be. So now you can think about, after sitting down and kind of thinking about what you want the outcome to be, you can think about individual project ideas. What interests do your students have? What interests do the parents of your students may have? Do they like to cook? Do they like to garden? What gardening or growing efforts already exist in your students' community? Are there any parks or green areas nearby? Are there any community gardens in the area? You can ask yourself, what would students find encouraging? I say definitely look for what encourages them and if something already exists. The point in finding something that already exists is so that you can get a taste of what you may want to do. So maybe partnering with a community garden allows you to take your students there and work with those people before you commit to doing a garden yourself. That way you kind of get to try it before you buy it and not overwhelm yourself. Also, one important thing you need to do is consider cultural components that can be incorporated in your gardening curriculum. The importance for that is so that students can see themselves in the activities. That helps them become stakeholders early on in the efforts that you're trying to do. And so an example of a cultural component is taking the idea of a recipe pizza garden, but doing it in an African keyhole garden method. So what you basically would do in planning this is you would think about the toppings that you like on your pizza, or have your students think about the toppings that they like on their pizza. And then maybe you can gather seed packets and have them plant them, or you can just discuss them, or maybe even have them taste the different toppings that could be on a pizza. And then if you went ahead and gardened it in the African keyhole garden method, you can see how it's kind of a raised garden. So that would help if you had a student that maybe had a special need and could not get low to the ground. There's also inside in the middle, a compost bin already inside of there. So you already have everything kind of built into one. You have your composting and your gardening, and you're bringing in kind of fusing two cultures in one. So here are some options that could be possible activities using that one idea. So you have from elementary drawing out a piece of garden, to maybe even tasting plants or toppings, like I mentioned before, or in high school or adult level, also going through with implementing growing the garden. Now, in your efforts, you want to get other people involved. So you might want to consider any other educational providers in your school that could help you with the effort. Are they interested in gardening or cooking? It could be teachers, deans, lunch attendants. I know of one school in the city where the lunch attendants have taken over the garden, and they have gardened every piece of land around the school, and it is magnificent. Also, you may want to see if there are any parents in your school's PTA that may be interested in gardening or cooking. Now, they may not be the parents of your students, but I will tell you, as a former PTA committee member, every child in the school was my child. I had interest in what was best for every child in the school, regardless. And so you may find parents who can come alongside and help you. And then also, again, are there gardens in your area? Are there garden groups in your area? You can look at, there's a National Association for Community Gardens. You can look at their website and find out if there's any gardens in your area. There's definitely lots of community gardens in the Grand Rapids area. Also, what organizations, businesses, and other schools in your community can partner with your class? There are many organizations in the city that help with gardening, offer gardening classes, and some of them even have their own community gardens. Businesses like Home Depot, they have community initiatives to help already set up to donate items that would help you with gardening tools and lumber if you want to build raised beds. Also, other schools, you can use this as an opportunity to do field trips, visiting each other's school, maybe pen pal with other classrooms who are in other schools who are doing gardening initiatives and so forth. So, as a part of this event tonight, you will or have received, a participant gift. And these are items that I chose because I thought it would be important to have some tools to get started. So one of those things is a 5-gallon bucket. This 5-gallon bucket that you will receive and lid are food grade. It is important when you are gardening or composting, that you use a food grade bucket, because if it's not food grade, whatever chemicals are in the plastic can come out in your produce, okay? So with that bucket, if you're not a grower, if you don't have a green thumb, you can still have a great scientific experience for your students around growing or gardening, because you can use that bucket to compost. Also, with a hand shovel, you will need it whether you are growing or composting. Now you see a lovely little bulb there, and you will receive more than one bulb with your gift. Now, bulbs, the idea with this is something you can do now while the winter is going on. You can either plant it. Again, if you don't have a green thumb, you can dissect it. You can have the students look at the inside of it and see what is entailed in the science going on inside of a bulb. And then you have a pack of kale seeds, a pack of bok choy seeds, and a pack of collard green seeds. I chose those specifically because they're all greens from different cultures. Most people don't know that if you cook them together, they are great flavor together. They add so much to each other in enriching the taste experience. And so I remember working in the city with a food pantry and trying to convince people to take the bok choy or to take the kale and cook it with their collard greens, because it would enrich the flavor. And so this is just a way to have a component of diversity within your scientific experience that you want to give to your students. So this brings me to the end of my talk today. I want to thank you so much for your time. Here is my email if you have any further questions beyond tonight. And so as Mara, I believe, is going to gather the questions, I want to talk to you about what I do in the Environmental and Sustainability Studies program at GVSU. So I teach students about what it means to be a sustainability practitioner. I talk about the history of sustainability. I talk about different components within sustainability. We talk about contextual things from our textbook, but I also talk to them about things that are not in the textbook, questions they should ask when they're on professional experiences, or questions they should ask in job interviews. We talk about how organizations and businesses are governed and how they can work within those systems so they don't get stuck in silos. I also talk to them a lot. I actually kind of almost browbeat them with the importance of working with the community as well as networking, and your networking being your help work and your hard work and the people who understand you and help you, because nobody understands what you're going through like someone also going through it. So again, I thank you for your time, and I will be taking any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Crystal. That was fantastic. Thanks for sharing your story with us and for opening up your journey so that we could be a part of it. I have quite a few wonderful questions that I gathered through the chat, and as our discussion continues, we have plenty of time to talk and to field more questions. So don't feel that you can't continue asking. Just keep pasting those in the chat and we'll catch them as they come in. The first question that we have is from Jordan. What advice do you have for teachers looking to write grants related to gardening or water quality opportunities for students?
I would say to research, look for grants that fit that, or look for grants that you can work within. There is a big difference between federal grants and those that are private sector. Federal grants tend to be a little more stricter with things like where activities are being done, things like that. So they're a little harder to work with. And so I know people who would totally avoid them. But it's possible. Research, I would say even start with a simple Google search and go to the foundation websites. I will also say go to the Johnson Center on campus. They're a great resource as well.
Absolutely. What do you think are the best methods for inspiring students to form a thoughtful and intentional relationship with their food?
So the earlier you start, actually, the better. I worked with an organization where there was a daycare on site and they cooked all the food from scratch, and it gave a great opportunity to have small children have conversation around food. So the earlier you start, the better. Be a good example. What are you bringing in front of the class? What are you putting in your mouth that they see? If they see you enjoying it, they'll enjoy it. And so little things like that make a difference. We have to be good examples. One of the things I tell my students, I tell them, what would I look like coming and talking to you about the environment? And every time you saw me, I had like a throwaway plastic bottle. Would you think I care? Would I be greenwashing your educational experience? So being a good example and a good model, that starts the conversation right there.
That's a really good point. Another question is from Hannah. What are ways to cultivate from the beginning a sense of community within garden spaces? And more specifically, the common, this is my plot versus that idea of this is our shared space.
Okay, so if you decide to go the way of a community garden, you don't have to. There's many ways to give that experience to your classroom. That's kind of like doing a community garden is kind of like the big option in all of the options. But if you are working with the community and you choose a community garden, set the tone early that it's a shared space. It's for everyone. Set up things where people are taking turns, not just taking from the garden, but also putting time into the garden. Give them ownership. Let them be a stakeholder. Let them name it. Let them pick what's going to be grown. The more they see themselves as stakeholders and the more that they know it's a shared space, the more that will go forth and they will buy into that and they will do that. And you have to set that example again of this is a shared space. This is not a one person take situation.
It belongs to everyone.
Yes.
We have another question from from Aaron. And I'm going to start pasting these. I think as we get more in depth, we're getting a little bit more complicated with our questions. So in case you need to reference them, Crystal or anyone else, I'm going to put them in the chat starting now. Aaron works in a museum in the Grand Rapids Public Museum. What advice do you have for institutions like museums, gardens, etc., on how to be more open and welcoming and inviting for young people of color so that more youth can have meaningful, inspiring experiences like you had at the Garfield Park Conservatory?
Sure. So at the conservatory, I would say they were always mindful to do things that kids were thinking about, young people cared about, the community cared about. So if they grew edible things, they grew things that were used ethnically with the people who lived in the area. So there were always like areas that had collard greens or areas that had things that you could associate culturally with yourself. And then also with other people who were coming there to visit. I remember my last summer there, they built a sensory garden because they wanted to be more inclusive of people who had those challenges. And then they went a step further and they built it all up ADA high, so wheelchairs could come in and the paths were wide. And so being inclusive. So be mindful, I would say, to be inclusive of all of the people who come and visit, not just one sect, but everyone. Inclusion is the key to a lot.
Absolutely. We have a great question from David. These are all great questions. Thank you all for participating in this. David's question is, I am impressed with the empowerment you demonstrate through the connection with food and the environment. Do you explicitly discuss this notion of empowerment with your students? If so, at what grade level do you make this connection and in what ways?
Yes, so it's a little easier to make the connection for me right now because my students are young adults. And so I get it. I mean, they get it. And I tend not to sugarcoat. I give them fair warning when things are going to not be so cute that come out. I tell them things like people are messy, but the efforts are rewarding. And so with older students, it's a little easier to get that point across. With younger students, you kind of have to go with what their interest is and where their heart lies. So you kind of have to survey them, you know, if you hear them if you overhear them talking about something specifically, go with that, incorporate it. It helps. Every touch of commonality helps.
So you, just to clarify, it's more of a case by case and depending on the maturity level of your students, Crystal, is that about right?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. We have another question from Hannah. With schools that want to actually build and cultivate gardens, how do you recommend engaging students / maintaining garden spaces during summer break when a lot of the exciting fruiting happens? In the past, when I worked with schools, this was always a barrier.
Yes, this is also something I've heard before in the community, especially the local community. So one of the things that they do is that partnership with organizations help them maintain that garden over the summer. So one school, they had a partnership with our kitchen table. And so our kitchen table would come or have their people that worked in their organization come and water and weed and take care. So it's all in that partnership, you know, or parents, what parents are available over the summer that live in the community that can stop by and weed or water. And so it's that part you need to have your partnerships play a big role with.
That's a great point. We have a question from Leah. Have you or anyone else in the Groundswell group used Paul Fleischman's book Seed Folks with your students or community garden curriculum? The part of your story about your neighborhood garden and your second mother there who empowered you to write grants reminds me of this story of a community coming together through an empty lot that becomes a garden space for the neighborhood.
So I have never heard of that book, but it sounds interesting. So send me the title of that book because I would love to read it. Sounds like someone has a bit of my story already. So that's cool.
Thank you, Leah, for sharing. Next question is from Vida. Are you connected to any urban gardens that utilize the food that is grown and used in restaurants in the neighborhoods that they're grown in? There are several in GR on Wealthy Street.
Yes, I have heard of these gardens and I've seen these gardens on Wealthy Street. And a lot of those gardens actually are connected to the restaurants on that street, unfortunately and frustratingly. And so a lot of them do not partner because the food they wanted specifically for their restaurant. So unfortunately, those gardens are kind of have been untouchable, or I found them to be untouchable. But near there are other gardens that do help with the community. For instance, Baxter Community Center has a garden, and their garden, the food goes right into the food pantry, and it's available for anyone who lives in the area and wants to partake in it. And they don't have to sign in to their food pantry to get it. They can just come in and partake. So those specific ones on Wealthy, not so much, but there are many others there that do partner and help each other out.
Thank you. A question from Araceli. In your own story, you jumped into many endeavors as a young adult, learning as you go. What gave you strength as you learned as you went? What advice do you have for us, or specifically young women of color, as we forge our ways in these spaces without much previous experience, learning as we go, in the starts of our journeys in sustainability work?
So I definitely didn't get that strength from myself. I definitely thought about all the ladies in my community that would take time with me. The one lady was not the only one. On my street, I was blessed to have many. So the lady next door, in fact, when I was leaving for college, she specifically gave me a suitcase. And she told me, she said, I don't care if you don't use it, but take it with you. And I was like, that's weird. Why is she giving me this suitcase? And so she said, the reason why I'm giving you this suitcase is because I always wanted to go to college. And if you take my suitcase, I feel like I went with you. So things like that gave me the strength. I knew I wasn't doing it just for myself. I knew I had to push for it for those who couldn't be there. So those are the strengths that I still draw on today. You know, it doesn't leave you just because you grow up. You still have that within you. I know the shoulders I stand on. I know they're strong, and it pushes me to work diligently so that the people who come behind me don't have to stand on weak shoulders. So that is important to me. So that is where I draw my strength. I do it for the people who can't.
Thank you so much.
That was beautiful. Thank you. Lindsay asks that, here's her question. I'm a social studies teacher, but we do a lot of cross-curricular connections and utilize place-based education at my school. What connections have you made with your students between history and social studies content and urban gardening, food, and the environment?
So I haven't made a lot of connection with history other than to talk about when talking about my own story and how that touched history. We haven't done a lot with history. We do talk about history when in terms of policy and how different policies have come to be. So we talk about how the water policies and different acts and President Nixon, you know, having this bad reputation, but actually doing some great things for the environment before not being in office. So in those ways, we talk about history, but we really don't do a lot of historical things. Now we do work side by side with in real time community partners. And I have a lot of community partners stop by my class to talk to my students. And that effort is twofold for me. I like to give my students the opportunity to see people actually doing the work and hear accounts that are boots on the ground. I also want to give them the opportunity to connect with people out in the community. So when it's time for them to start building their network or look for internships, they have people to turn to and connect with. And so in that way, we do a lot of connections. Right now, I have two classes who are working with the Grand Rapids Urban Ag Committee, and they are mapping edible trees for them. I have one class who I have taught to write activity curriculum, and they are writing another curriculum for New City Neighbors. And they all have had an opportunity to go out to New City Neighbors to their current site and volunteer on the farm and be there and see what it's like. So in those ways, I do connect my students.
Absolutely. Crystal said something to Jessica and I yesterday. She said, every class that I have and every workshop I do, I want to make it a community. And I think that that's really evident. And especially tonight, we have a Groundswell community that we've welcomed you into. And I think you can call that a certain kind of cultural study or social study.
Yes. And I feel welcomed. So thank you.
Good. Hannah mentioned that Open Lens in Chicago did a great project with students, and they created the African American Water Trail with the local waterways that intersected where they lived. So that's a really great example, not directly local, but close, of that connection between social studies and the environment. Clay's wondering, would you, Crystal, or your class be interested in working with a Groundswell school or project?
Absolutely. It depends on the project and if we can make it fit in that particular semester as a class project. So it just depends on the project and the timing.
Is there a timing that's best for you? It's just beginning of each semester?
Well, fall is usually good depending on the project, especially if it's something that is going to be outdoors. Winter semester, not in West Michigan. So winter semester brings out projects like this winter. I'm gonna have a couple of classes work on brochures for the NAACP Environmental Injustice Committee. So things like that are things that I look for in winter semester. So still interpretation, still working with a community partner or someone, and still the ability to connect, make connections for the students.
Absolutely. I have another question, this time from Sarah. She says, I think you could talk about the origin of different foods, which places are different plants and domesticated and which would be native to North America. I have talked to students about that, and we sometimes talk about how plants travel. That could connect geography and history of colonization, imports, exports, etc. Do you or have you talked with any of your classes or any workshops in the past about that?
About native plants? No, not so much. Usually when I do talks, it's usually about food systems. So my class is required for our E&S students to get their food system certification. So I do a lot of talks outside of the classroom about food systems. My work is mostly in food injustice. So that has become my wheelhouse more or less. I have known some people who talk about native plants, and I know some people specifically talk about native plants when it comes to doing like edible landscaping. And so I always call up those who that's their wheelhouse, that's their specialty, friends of mine, using my network. And so whenever I have something that I'm not sure about or I'm not the expert in, I make the time and the space for those in my network who can come in and do it better than me and give them the platform. That's how we help each other.
Absolutely. Christina asks, do you incorporate the climate crisis into the engagement you're doing around growing food, and how?
Absolutely. In my classes, we talk about COVID. We talk about how COVID has had a negative effect on people of color and communities of color, how it has had an effect on the environment. One of the things that I teach my students to do is a 30-second elevator speech for when you have, I give them the scenario. If you are in the grocery store and there's someone in front of you and they're looking at the cover of a magazine and they're saying, oh, climate isn't real. What's your comeback? What are you going to say? So we practice what is environmental sustainability, why is it important, and one simple thing someone can do to get involved. So that is one of the things, one of the tools that I kind of set up for my students. I'm sorry, it's late and I've lost my train of thought. Can you give me that question again?
Yeah, and I realized I forgot to paste it again to the chat as well. And Christina, you can chime in. I interpreted your question as the climate crisis, or did you mean the current COVID crisis? Unfortunately, we live in a time where we need to know.
Yeah, both are. So actually in my class, we've actually talked about both. I actually started one class with an artist picture I found that was Donald Trump blowing hot air on the earth. And so I had my students interpret what they saw there. And I said, well, for me, knowing COVID, now the earth is blowing hot air on us and saying, look, there's a problem. And because you didn't listen, now I'm going to get you all back, so to speak. And so, yeah, we talk about the brush fires. We talk about the Napa Valley fires. We talked about the hurricanes. And we also talked about COVID. And we talk about how environmental sustainability affects all of those things. So not only do we talk about history and policy, we talk about what is in front of us right now.
Hey, Crystal, would you give us those 3 questions you have your students reply? I was going to post them in the chat, but then I got pulled away. So what was the 3 questions they should be prepared to answer at the grocery store?
What is environmental sustainability? Quick 1 sentence answer. Then why is it important? And what one simple thing someone can do. Because I teach my students, when you are in a community, there's everyone in the community. Not everyone has a college education or a background in environmental sustainability. So if you come in with your ideas and you're talking up here, you're never going to meet the people. You have to meet people where they are. In my professional work in the city, I've had to work with participants who had gone to high school, who had gone to college, but I also had a lady who was completely illiterate and she was legally blind. And I had to interpret to her the same materials. And so I teach them that it's important, don't always come in up here. Keep it plain and simple so you reach everybody. So that was the point in them learning the elevator speech. And they all have their own version, their own interpretation. Nothing was right or wrong. And I teach them the reason why it's okay to have your own version of things is because our climate issue, our issues around food, our issues around systemic racism, they're wicked problems. They're multifaceted. They have many solutions and it takes many hands to do the work. But the first thing you have to do is convince somebody that it's important to get involved in the work in the first place, to see themselves in the solution in the first place. So that's why the 3rd question comes into play. What can you simply do to be involved? And I tell them different common things where they can meet people with. Recycling. Recycling hits every socioeconomic level. People who have money want to keep money. People who don't know how to don't have money need to know how to make things work in multiple ways. So recycling hits everybody. Start there, composting, whatever. But keep things plain and simple, because if you come in up here, you're not going to reach everybody.
That is so true. And I think everybody here absolutely feels that that resonates with them as well. We have a question from John. It seems to me that such projects would be practically useful in all families in my district, which is generally financially stressed. Is there an established protocol that could be made available to families? Or if not protocol, a practical plan that could be put into writing?
If you go with doing or implementing a community garden, you can look for, actually, what comes to my mind is grants, grant funding. Look for grants that deal with education and food availability, nutritious food, things that deal with food security and education, things that deal with food sovereignty and education. You can build programming around a grant that you find and find a way to use those monies to help the families in your community while building this community garden, which I have found in a lot of communities, people become stakeholders and they tend to care more about their food, where food is coming from. Since COVID has plagued us, I have had so many people reach out to me about gardening and wanting to start a garden and um, canning and food preservation. I would definitely tap into those things because that allowed a way for more money to be funneled out for those efforts. So look for things around that and see if you can build something that helps the families in your community.
That's great advice. Thanks for that question, John. I've reached the end of my sift through the chat. Does anyone else have any questions they would like to add? As we close out, we're getting near the end, but we do have time for one or two more.
Feel free to also follow up on your questions, and I'll give Crystal a breathing second while I again remind everybody to, yep, thank you, Joanna. You're reading my mind, to sign up to get your urban garden starting kit if you are interested. Crystal's designed it for you, and it contains a 5-gallon food grade bucket, a lid, hand shovel, a packet of bulbs that you can plant, a packet of collard, kale, and bok choy seeds. So all of that on the form, if you fill it out, we will be emailing you later on with the date for the pickup as things start to arrive through the wonky delivery system. So that was that, but I would like to take it back if there's other people that want to follow up on questions to Crystal.
We did have Sally just post in the chat. She is available for those teachers who are interested in growing food with kids. Sally is one of our Groundswell consultants and has worked with many of the teachers here on this call and with our Groundswell community in general. She's an awesome, awesome partner and very knowledgeable. So in addition to this talk, if you're interested in learning to grow food with your class or with kids, Sally pasted her information in the chat. Any other questions?
Recording. Go ahead.
I also included my email in the chat. Feel free to.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Crystal, would you like to give a description of the bucket instructions for the bulbs?
Sure. So, like I said, you don't have to plant the bulbs. You can dissect them. You can use a little food coloring water to give it some color so that the students can see the inside, the different parts of the inside of the bulb. Also with the seeds, you don't have to plant them. You can donate them. You can have your class donate them to a local library. Most public libraries have a seed library inside, or you can take some time and maybe start your own seed library at your school. But if you plant them, depending on the bulb, plant them deep enough. You might want to consider putting them in the pot and not the bucket. You might want to save the bucket for planting the seeds or planting later on in the growing season next year. So if you are going to use the bucket as a planter, you would need to drill holes in the bottom of the bucket. If you are planning to use it as a compost bin, it will come with a lid. You will need to drill holes in the top in the lid for the use of the compost to make sure it gets enough air. And then make sure you check your ratios when you're doing compost. So make sure you have enough green and brown material in there, or you're going to have a big stinky mess. So, any other questions?
We did have a question from Joan, although it's a couple people are answering it in the chat. For Crystal or for Groundswell, is anyone working with Hispanic families in Grand Rapids or West Michigan?
Yes, you can contact the Urban Core Collective. They work with a various amount of organizations, not just those that are Latino, but they do work with the Latino population as well. So I would say go to them so that you're getting more than one connection at a time, so to speak. So you don't have to go to each individual one. You can hit all the ones that are in that collective at one time.
Crystal, I'm going to have to insist you read through this chat at some point so you can see all the great things everyone is saying to you so far about enjoying your presentation and sharing your story and enjoying your story. So make sure you take the time to read the comments.
I will do that. It was great being here and talking to you all. And you can't see my family, but they are on the other side of the screen. My son is taking notes because he has a family project or family tree to present on Saturday for his mentoring group, and my husband is in his recliner for support. So we're all here, and we all appreciate it.
If anyone else would like to make any comments or have any questions, feel free to turn your microphone off and we'll just spend your microphone on, and we'll spend the last couple of minutes just, with a natural conversation and then closing the night out about 8:30, right on time.
I do have one other thing. So as Mara said, in my class, I create a community. I tell them we're not a class, we're a community, we're a micro community. We have effect on the macro community, and we talk about the exchange in between that. So sometimes when you are working with college students, people think, they're grown, they're adults, they need something different than maybe a younger student does. That's true. But know that a point of commonality is just that, a point of commonality. So in my class, because we're not together, my classes are all online, I do show as much care and concern for them as I can, because we are in a time of COVID. I don't know what their lives are like when they're not with me or in the little box on my screen. So one of the things that I use as a tool of commonality is I give them special hugs. I give them Baby Yoda hugs. So from me to you, a Baby Yoda hug. They love Baby Yoda. We talk about the Mandalorian. We talk about being superheroes, because to care for other people in messy situations You have to have the power of caring. And I tell them that's a superpower. The power of compassion everyone does not have. So in the beginning, we talk about if you would be a superhero, if you were a superhero, what would you want your power to be like? But at the end of my class, I tell them that they are superheroes because they already have the power of compassion. So from me to you, Baby Yoda hugs. I actually have, if you need a smaller hug, I have a smaller Baby Yoda too. I'm always supplied. I actually have 3 Baby Yodas. So they're
Never
my,
have too many.
they're my co-pilots in this whole situation.
Oh, that had some fans, definitely. All right. Thank you so much, Crystal. I've enjoyed getting to know you through the process of preparing for tonight. Thank you for opening up and sharing your story with all of us. We've all enjoyed it. You've made us laugh, you've made us cry, all those beautiful things. So
Yay, it's a roller coaster. So is life. Get on and hold on.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Right, and thanks.
Yes, thank you.
That's awesome.
Thanks, everyone. That was really great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great to see all your faces.
And with that.
I'm going to be peeking in the chat.
Please do. Lots of lovely comments. And it's great from Groundswell to hear how the food went because, as Jessica said, that's the first time we've done it. So we're happy that it worked out for all of you who were able to grab it.
Yeah, bless your hearts for doing that. That was awesome.
That was awesome. Thank you, guys. That was great.
Good.
Thank you for taking us up on that and supporting local business. You guys all rock too.